All right. Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. You guys ready for this one?
Let's do it.
This one was a really interesting read. We're talking about Blackout by Candace Owens.
Okay.
So for folks who haven't heard of this one, Blackout is it's a book.
Yeah.
It's all about race and politics in America. And, you know, Candace Owens, she's a very
controversial figure.
Yeah, very strong opinions. And what we wanted to do was, you know, you wanted us to really break down the core arguments of the book.
Yeah.
So we're going to do just that. We're going to break down, like, what are the key points that Owens is making, and then also what are some of the examples that she uses to back up her points.
Right. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about this book is that, you know, she's using a lot of historical examples and statistics. That might be unfamiliar to a lot of people.
Totally.
So we're going to unpack some of that stuff too.
Exactly. Like, for example, and this is one that really kind of blew my mind a little bit. She connects welfare programs from way back in the 1960s to a decline in the Black nuclear family.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty big statement to make.
It is. That's a big claim.
So, like, how does she even start to, like, try to connect those two things?
Well, to understand Owens' argument, you really have to kind of go back in time a little bit to the 1960s with President Lyndon B. Johnson and his Great Society initiatives.
Right.
Now, Owens argues that these programs, while, you know, they were aimed at alleviating poverty, they kind of had this unintended consequence.
Okay.
And they ended up incentivizing single-parent households.
Oh, okay.
And so to kind of drive this point home, she highlights this like really stark difference in family structure from back then to now. So in the 1960s, most Black children were raised in two-parent homes. But today, the single-parent household rate among Black Americans is over 70%.
Yeah, that's a massive change.
It is.
Like, is she saying that these programs are, like, solely responsible for that change?
Well, not necessarily. You know, she does acknowledge that there are other factors at play.
Yeah.
Things like, you know, economic shifts and mass incarceration have definitely played a role.
Right.
But you know what I think is really insightful here is that Owens is using this example to highlight that even well-intentioned policies can sometimes have these unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Like, are we actually addressing the root cause of a problem? Or are we just putting a Band-Aid on things?
Yeah, it really makes you think about the, like, long-term impacts, right?
Right.
Like, we try to do something good, but then years down the road, it's like, ooh, maybe we didn't think about all of the consequences.
Think about all the different factors that could be impacted by a single policy.
Yeah, it makes you really think about the complexity.
Yeah.
Of, like, social programs and policy making and stuff.
Absolutely. And this whole idea of unintended consequences, it kind of leads right into Owens's next big point, which is all about economic self-sufficiency.
Okay.
And to illustrate this point, she kind of contrasts, like, these historical stories of Black entrepreneurial success. Like, think about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Right.
Which was tragically destroyed.
In the 1921 race massacre.
Yeah, in the 1921 race massacre, right. And she's contrasting those stories with what she sees as kind of a modern-day over-reliance on things like government assistance and affirmative action.
Okay, so she's basically advocating for less reliance on these programs.
Yeah.
But then what about affirmative action? Like, isn't that a policy that's designed to address like historical inequalities?
Yeah. Affirmative action has been a really hotly debated topic for decades.
For sure.
And, you know, there are different types of affirmative action programs, and some are more controversial than others.
Yeah.
But Owens basically contends that even with good intentions, these programs don't necessarily translate into genuine economic empowerment.
I see. So she's kind of saying, like, yeah, we've got to try a different approach here.
Right.
Like, maybe focusing more on individual initiative and a little less on, like, the government stepping in to try to fix things.
Exactly. And this kind of leads us into her critique of the education system.
Okay.
She argues that these, like, failing public schools, particularly in Democrat-led cities, they're kind of trapping Black students in this cycle of poverty. And she's especially critical of teachers' unions, saying that they prioritize their own interests above the students, and they limit the options for parents who are looking for better opportunities for their kids.
So she's like a big proponent of school choice then?
Absolutely. She believes that parents, and especially Black parents, should have way more control over where their kids go to school. You know, and it all ties back to this theme of individual agency and empowerment. She even goes as far as to criticize like specific curriculums
Oh.
and teacher training programs, arguing that they're just not adequately preparing students for the real world.
Okay, so let's move on to a topic that I know you've been really digging into in your research, which is crime and policing.
Yes.
Now, Owens, she really stirs the pot with this one, right?
She does.
I mean, she's basically challenging the entire prevailing narrative about police brutality.
Right. She kind of shifts the focus to what she calls the quote-unquote more pressing issue
Yeah.
of black-on-black crime. And she uses these FBI statistics that show that over 90%
Wow.
of Black homicide victims are killed by other Black individuals, not by police officers.
So wait, is she saying that police brutality isn't a real problem?
Well, not necessarily.
Okay.
But what she's doing here is she's advocating for a broader perspective.
Okay.
She's saying that when we only focus on police brutality, we ignore the statistically larger issue within Black communities. Now, this has obviously drawn a lot of criticism.
Right.
People point out that this line of reasoning can be used to deflect from systemic issues like racial bias in the criminal justice system.
Yeah, it's a really complex issue. There's
Right.
a lot of nuance, right?
Right.
And Owens, she doesn't stop there. She goes on to take aim at the media,
She does.
accusing them of exploiting racial tensions for political gain.
Yeah, she sees a pattern here of selective outrage
Uh-huh.
and the distortion of facts, and she claims that Black conservatives, like herself, are often silenced
Okay.
or vilified
Yeah.
in order to maintain the status quo. She even talks about her own personal experiences of facing backlash for her views. And she highlights figures like Thomas Sowell
Okay.
and Clarence Thomas, who have also been criticized
Mm-hmm.
for holding conservative viewpoints.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about, what is the role of the media
Right.
in shaping public perception, right?
Yes.
Are we even getting a balanced view of these issues?
Yeah.
Right. Owen's critique, whether you agree with her or not, it really underscores the importance
No.
of media literacy
Mhm.
and critical thinking.
Yeah.
We can't just take everything at face value. We have to be able to evaluate all the information we're getting from multiple different sources
Yeah.
and then form our own conclusions.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different things here.
We have.
What's the takeaway? What does Candace Owens want us to do with all this information?
Well, at the end of the day, she's really issuing a call to action for Black Americans.
Okay.
She wants them to reconsider their traditional political allegiances
Okay.
and really embrace these conservative values.
Like what? Like what kind of conservative values?
Well, things like faith
Yeah.
and family, personal responsibility,
Okay.
and free market economics.
Free market economics. Can you break that down for our listeners who might not know what that means?
Sure. So free market economics is basically a system where prices and production are determined by unrestricted competition between privately owned businesses,
Go ahead.
and there's minimal government intervention.
Gotcha.
So basically, Owens believes that these values, not government assistance, are the real path to empowerment and success.
So she's basically arguing that it's relying on the government that's actually holding people back.
That's the crux of her argument. And, to kind of support this idea, she points to the achievements of Black conservatives across a whole variety of different fields as evidence of, the effectiveness of this different approach.
Okay, so big picture. After diving into Blackout, what's the message for our listeners?
Well, Owens is really challenging Black voters to take a really hard look at the policies they've supported and really ask themselves, have these policies actually led to real improvement in their lives? She's questioning whether the Democratic Party actually has their best interests at heart,
Okay.
and she's encouraging Black voters to consider a different path.
That's a pretty bold message.
It is.
And regardless of whether you agree with her conclusions, I mean, the book definitely makes you think.
It does.
It raises some really important questions
Right.
about race and politics
Right.
and the path to empowerment.
It reminds us that, these open and honest discussions are important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So hopefully, this deep dive into Blackout has given you a solid understanding of Candace Owens' key arguments. And, now it's your turn. Go out there and explore these issues.
Do your own research.
Do your own research.
Form your own conclusions.
Yeah. And let us know what you think. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you next time. Bye.